here with 30 of your must-read classics. Now, I think people are very put off reading classics because they could be quite challenging to read, a lot of difficult vocabulary, perhaps a lot of concepts that are a bit foreign to us nowadays. So in this video, I'm going to share each of the classics, going to share which ones were my favourites, and I'll also mention about which ones were challenging to read so that you can choose what is best for you. I have done my best to do a group of classics from all around the world, but I know there are many, many more out there, so perhaps I'm going to do a part 2 in the future. I'm Steffi from Books That Teach Us. I give book reviews with no spoilers, share what those books taught me. Kicking off our classics is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I actually first read this book when I was a teenager. I had a fantastic English teacher at my school, and she gave us summer reading of 2 books to read, which are both on this list. And then we got to pick which one to study. Now, we didn't actually pick this book to study, which I think was a bit of a shame in retrospect, but I think perhaps I was too young to fully take into account the very real issues that came up in this book. And rereading it as an adult, I think I actually got a lot more from it. So it is set in the Deep South. In the 90s, but the book was actually written in 1960. Now, I've been a little bit loose with what does constitute as a classic. So I've gone with kind of any of those famous books that are out there that we tend to think are set in the past and that we associate with classics. So I've been a little bit loose with it. I think I'm going to do a whole nother playlist on books that are over 100 years old in the future. One of the main takeaways from this book, it was probably one of the first books that I had read where there was racism, deep entrenched racism, and I think I probably found that quite shocking as a 15-year-old growing up in Cambridge, England, where everyone was majority white. I don't think I'd really realised I was white for a long time. I think this woke up like a sense of injustice in me. I think it has made me want to read a lot of other books like it, and I think the main takeaways are just about justice, social justice, systems and how they work, and just a lot of tellings about what the Black community had to deal with throughout history, particularly in the USA. Okay, book number 2. I feel like everybody thought I should say The Great Gatsby, but I'm not actually going to. I'm going to say another book by Scott Fitzgerald called The Beautiful and Damned. I really, really enjoyed this book. It follows the story of Anthony, who is a very rich, spoilt young man, and the way that he lives, he gets married, and there's like this love story that goes on through it, and it's just about the squandering of money, the lack of understanding of wealth and what it can do, and the kind of aimlessness that can happen to people. So it's not a cheery story, but I did really enjoy reading it. I think one of the moral learnings of it is like we all need a purpose in life. Number 3 is a British classic. It is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Bronte sisters, very well-known writers in the UK. It was written in 1847, but I definitely would say it is fairly accessible to read. I often think about my own students in this because I teach students who have English as their second language. So I'm not going to say it's totally achievable for all of them, but I definitely would say it's more accessible for adults. It's a famous story of female independence, of falling in love, of betrayal. I think we probably all feel very strongly about Mr. Rochester and what he did in it. No spoilers. There's a lot of references to this book in modern day when we talk about attics or things in hiding. So I think that's quite interesting. I actually studied this novel when I was at university, and I think it brought a whole new depth from it. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but we had lots of discussions in one of the seminars about, like, was Jane actually on an equal footing with Mr. Rochester at the end? And was that real, or could that flip and change? And so I found that really, really interesting. It's definitely worth reading. There's lots of fantastic films of this as well, but nothing is quite like reading the book. Number 4, I've got to go for another Bronte sister. This one is Emily Bronte. When Emily died, and a lot of the Bronte sisters, they died very, very young, the sisters found this novel and they wanted to burn it. They thought it was so dark, so scandalous, it was going to rain down upon them. How could their sister have possibly have thought up such a dark, twisting tale? I am talking about Wuthering Heights. It definitely is dark. It's very violent. There's this love story in it where you really question, is this love? Is this obsession? Like, I think we really mix up this idea of like passion, and it's like, oh, we want that. And then it's like, Heathcliff, I don't know. I think he's portrayed as, you know, this kind of brooding man. And I remember having a discussion at university about this book, and it was like, oh, does anyone here fancy Heathcliff? And whether that said something about you, if you actually liked this kind of tormented, twisted soul in the novel. I think reading it as a teacher, you see a lot of things that he was a very neglected child. There's definitely like a racial element there that is very rarely discussed because of how he's described in the novel. It's actually thought that he was not white. They refer to him as a Lascar, who was either potentially black or South Asian. I do think there's this amazing quote in it, which I just absolutely love. And the quote is, "Whatever souls are made of, his and mine are the same," which is just such poetic writing. No matter what you think about the love story and how toxic it is, you really have to respect that. There's also some really dark activities that happen in the novel that have very often been glossed over in TV shows. I think one of the latest films actually did portray it. I'm not going to say a spoiler, but you can read it for yourself and see what you think happens in this very dark moment in the novel. There's one other quote that I just remembered. I actually think I wrote like a whole essay on this because I was really obsessed with it. I'm going to read it out so I don't get it wrong. So this is the main character, and she has kind of 2 potential love stories happening. This is from Catherine. "My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it, I'm well aware, as winter changes the trees. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary." And I feel like that quote sums up quite a lot about the kind of toxic relationships that we would definitely talk about nowadays if we saw any of our friends in this kind of relationship. I would generally say this novel is fairly accessible in terms of language. You just heard the quote from it. I think it's quite understandable. Just in contrast to that, we're currently studying War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells at school, and the language, I would say, is definitely not very accessible in that book. So just to kind of compare, if you might have known that one, the Brontes definitely much easier to read. My next book is the famous or infamous Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, our famous Russian writer on the list. It was written in 1878. Obviously, this is the English translation that I've read, and it's just such a fantastic, vibrant story. So Anna Karenina is already married and she falls in love with Count Vronsky and has an affair, and it's all about how her life completely unravels after she falls in love, how she is treated because she is a woman. And I think I really read this book, and one of my main takeaways was, oh my gosh, thank God society is not like that nowadays. Having said that, there probably are some places in the world where there's still a lot of stigma, perhaps. There are some countries in the world where divorce is illegal. But this was very much the world that Anna Karenina grew up in. It's a very tragic story. Definitely worth reading. It's not as fat as War and Peace, so it won't take you as long. I did also enjoy War and Peace. That was a contender for this list, but I thought I'll go for one Tolstoy, and I went for Anna Karenina. The film of it is absolutely fantastic as well, but I think it misses a lot of the background of the characters. A lot of the understanding is kind of cut out in the film, in my opinion. So I definitely recommend reading the novel. So my book number 6 is one of my favourite books that I read when I was younger. It was written in 1906. and it is White Fang by Jack London. This is the story about a wolf who experiences a lot of cruelty in the wild, in the wolf pack, and befriends a man, a character kind of like Jack London himself. And it's the story of their bond. And I just absolutely love this book. I think this book is the reason why I'm so obsessed with wolves. I really, really love wolves. And it's just this beautiful story of kind of an interspecies friendship. Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but it's so beautiful. So yeah, I definitely recommend White Fang, especially if you're an animal lover. I read it when I was pretty young, I would say, like early teens. So I definitely don't remember that struggling with any of the language then. So I think this is definitely one of the more accessible ones for reading. Okay, number 7 has to be one of my personal favourites because I actually studied this at several different points in my life. It is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, I had a university lecturer who did a whole lecture on this book, and he was so mocking of Mary Shelley and the fact that Frankenstein was like bigger than he should have been because he was built from Frankenstein's monster was built from like bits of body, and how, you know, why would that be any bigger than an average person? But it's all about the sublime and how nature and things are bigger than us as humans. So anyway, I got really, really annoyed at that lecture. So now I would like to spread the love for Frankenstein. Mary Shelley was just 18 when she wrote this novel. She had recently experienced miscarriages, and so there are a lot of metaphors within the novel about birth, about labour, lots of things that kind of connect with babies. She said this was based on kind of a dream or nightmare that she had. And for anyone who doesn't know, Frankenstein is not the name of the monster. Frankenstein is the scientist that creates the monster. And in this book, there's the very real question of who is the monster and who is the human. It's just really breathtaking. It's actually what we call an epistolary novel, which means it's made using letters. So it starts off with a letter, and then the whole story is told kind of within this letter, but you totally forget it's a letter at different points. It's just really beautiful. I think it really references a lot about mistreatment of people just because they happen to look differently. I think it speaks to the inhumanity of people and that they can just go and put things out there in the world and then never take any accountability for it. And I just think what a success. This 18-year-old wrote this in 1818, and almost everybody today knows who Frankenstein is, or Frankenstein's monster, if they get a bit confused with that there. And I just think, wow, what? That really stood the test of time. It's a fantastic novel. I would say some of the language, obviously having been written in 1818, is a little bit challenging. But generally, I would say it's a fairly accessible read for most people. I think it actually kind of gets less fancy right at the beginning because it starts off as a letter. I feel like letters back then were written in very flowery language. So persevere a bit with the first bit until you get into the story. And because then the tone switches quite a lot. Mary Shelley's fantastic at that. Like even the language that the monster uses compared with the language that Frankenstein uses, like she's genius. I'm a big fan. Okay, number 8. Speaking of scary stories, this is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This was written in 1897 and I thought it was terrifying. I think that probably maybe people today wouldn't really find reading scary. We're exposed to so much horror, thrillers, jumpy things that I hate. That's why you will never see any horror books on this YouTube channel. But Dracula was something else. I had to sleep with the lights on. There are some really creepy sections with Dracula scaling the walls, and you know there's like dead bodies in the sack. And honestly, like apart from Twilight, which I can just about manage, like vampires just really freak me out. Like I think the idea of all that blood sucking and stuff, something about it just gets to me a lot. Maybe I was attacked by a vampire in a past life, I don't know. Yeah, I think my main takeaway was I didn't know people could write things this scary and freaky that long ago. Like, I kind of thought like being scared and jumpy was much more of a modern invention. So that definitely surprised me about this book. Read it at your peril. Okay, number 9 is the Iliad by Homer. Now, this was clearly written a very, very long time ago, and there are kind of more up-to-date versions, translations. I can't remember the one I read. I will try and find it and link it below. So the Iliad is the huge, big, interweaving story of lots of the Greek myths coming together. So there's whole sections of it that deal with Aeneas, Odysseus, the Trojan War. There's so much that goes on in there. However, I would definitely say that like I preferred lots of the modern day retellings of these. I think because they're often from a more female standpoint, they're often a lot more about the psychology or understanding characters' behaviour rather than, okay, there was this big battle over Helen and this is what happened. Like, so I do think it's worth reading because it pulls that all together. It's a really quite a fat book. I love Queen Dido. Just put that out there if anyone's reading that. She's a star. And yes, kind of the origins to a lot of the Greek myths are in this book. So it's good if you're interested in that. Now, I'm going to get around to doing my playlist on Greek myths. I've got loads of good ones that I'm going to talk about. Song of Achilles, Atalanta, Ariadne. I will get on that soon. So subscribe if you're interested in that. Number 10 is 1984 by George Orwell. I had obviously heard about this book for a long time, but I would say I read it for the first time probably a few years ago, and I was really shocked. Like, I had no idea. It was so kind of traumatic to read. I didn't know it was so pessimistic and disheartening. I learned a lot about like references to things from 1984 that I had no idea about. Some of you might know this already, but the show Big Brother got quite famous as I was growing up, where they had the big eye, and obviously the reality TV show, one of the first ones, I think, where everybody came together to live in a house and then the big eye was watching them all the time. That is from 1984. Big Brother is Watching You was the totalitarian government that would spy on everybody inside their homes. People's TVs were a camera. They were said to have the thought police, another phrase that we often reference nowadays as well, that they're actually policing your thoughts. And the character in it is kind of starting to open up to freedom, trying to look for ways to kind of get out of this absolute hell that they are living in. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it's quite an upsetting read, really. I was shocked at how upset I was by it. Perhaps tells us a little bit about our feelings about places in the world today as well. At number 11, this is Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This was written in 1951. This is the other book that my English teacher asked us to read over the summer holidays, and this is the one that we all picked, which is quite interesting because the main character is a teenager. He's super overdramatic. He's obsessed with necking or like trying to kiss girls, basically. And there's like this big twist that happens towards the end that I definitely didn't see coming when I read it when I was 15. And yeah, I think it's really interesting that my class chose this because now I kind of think the more enjoyable read was To Kill a Mockingbird. But perhaps when we were teenagers, this book seemed to align more. It's a lot about alienation as teenagers, like that kind of idea and bravado of trying to live up to something, and just that search for meaning and purpose and your identity and trying to figure out who you are when you're a teenager. And sometimes some of us as adults too. Number 12. Now, I had to put a Charles Dickens on the list and I really couldn't decide between some of them, but in an attempt to be a bit more global with my list, I went for A Tale of Two Cities. So the two cities in it are London and Paris. This was written in 1859. It is set during the French Revolution, which happened in 1789, and it really taught me a lot about the French Revolution. Like, I really think people should read it as an almost history book. I'm sure it's not all totally factually accurate. Maybe look that up afterwards, but It definitely taught me a lot about what the French Revolution meant for people, how it was perceived in London, how lots of people were freaking out in London that that was going to happen to the royal family in England as well. I think it does a really good job of talking about the Terror, which was the wave of violence that swept Paris at this time in history. And yeah, I just really learned a lot historically from this book. Okay, number 13. I loved this book. It is Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. This was one of the first books of its kind that I'd read like it. It's not as old as some of the other books on the list. It was written in 1961, and it's all about World War II and how the main character, he's trapped in this cycle and never able to get out of it. This book is the reason why we use the phrase catch 22 when you're stuck in something. So the main character, the pilot, he wants to get out of the war and the awful things that he's seeing. So he decides that if he's crazy, then he has to be grounded and he can't fly and get sent on these death missions. However, if he tells people that he's crazy, then that is self-preservation, and so that they feel that he's not crazy because he was rational enough to do that. So the whole thing is like you're stuck in this massive loop, and that is why we use the phrase catch 22 today, if my internet sources tell me correctly. I think it's fantastic. Imagine writing a novel and then everybody uses a phrase that you coined from the novel. It's a really bonkers read, very easy to read, from what I remember, and I definitely recommend it for anyone interested in like World War II literature, and also just to read something that has like coined phrases like Shakespeare. I think that sounds good. All right, number 14 is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is about as kind of gothic and ghost-like as I can go. And I think this book is absolutely fantastic. It's got one of the best opening lines. Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again. I don't know why. I just think it's such a good opening line. Anyway, so this book is about a woman who gets married to a wealthy Englishman, and she then marries him and then becomes head of the household there. However, she is haunted by memories, not by a real ghost, of his first wife, who was called Rebecca, and constantly kind of comparing herself. He won't talk about her. She very much feels like she is not the mistress of the house, that she's like the other woman, and Rebecca is still there in her smells. And there's some kind of creepy scenes in the book, and there's a huge big twist at the end, which I loved. Do not watch the film that was on Netflix recently of it. I was so disappointed it didn't capture any of that. So definitely read the book. Like, it's just fantastic story of all the different characters, of the kind of ghostly elements without being too freaky for a wimp like me. It's great. Number 15. Okay, another great book that I loved is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. I feel like this is very Bridgerton. If you've watched any of Bridgerton, it's like the original Bridgerton. It was written in 1847 to 88, and it's all about Becky Sharp, who kind of claws her way into society and makes her way through, and it's a really, really good comment on the shallowness of society. There was a fantastic series that they did recently of this. I watched it maybe last year or 2 years ago. Came out fairly recently, but that was a really, really good version of this book. But the book's just really good. It's like, you know, when you have that character and you're rooting for them, but they're kind of awful, so should you be rooting for them? Lots of characters in it that are very over the top. The backdrop is like the Napoleonic Wars, so I learned a little bit of that going on in the background, but mainly it's about like society and class, and yeah, really good. Okay, number 16. I've gone a little bit French this time with Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Now, this one kind of gave me like Anna Karenina vibes. Wealthy woman loses it all kind of genre, which is a bit depressing maybe, but it was perhaps, I don't know if these were written as like a warning to women at the time, like don't chase romance, don't chase love. That'd be quite interesting. I'm sure there's someone who's studied and done a PhD or a dissertation on that somewhere at some point. If it's you, let me know. But yeah, definitely like a falling from grace kind of story. I read it quite a long time ago. I remember it being fairly accessible to read. I don't remember like having to look up words, for example. So yes, another one of those fallen women type books. Speaking of, number 17 is Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. I really love this book. It was written in the 20s. It was banned when it came out. It was one of the first books to use the C word in it, as far as I understand, and very, very scandalous. It tells the story of Connie, who is the main character, who is married to a man, and then I believe he goes off to war and he comes back and he's in a wheelchair and can't make love, can't romance her. He's very intellectual, and Connie is not so much. It's almost like he's very academic, intellectual, and Connie needs that, like that humanity in a person, and she's not getting it in her husband. So she wanders off and she falls in love with the gamekeeper who is in charge of the grounds. This is very much a comment on class, like the woman of the huge big house falling in love with one of the staff. And there's some quite graphic sex scenes in it, which is probably why it was banned so much at the time of writing in the 20s. I actually think this is maybe like one of my favourite love stories. Definitely of the classics. I don't read that many love stories, so perhaps I need to do a whole love story playlist and measure them up. But this kind of felt like the most realistic, like the falling in love part, but then also like, is there longevity in it? Like, what's going to happen? They're from two totally different worlds, totally different classes, very frowned upon. And what's she going to do about her husband that she's married to? It's really interesting. Mellors is the name of the gamekeeper, and he really represents like this outdoor ruggedness, nature, doing things with your whole heart, like the antithesis of that kind of cold intellectual idea. And so there's a lot going on in this book, and I really recommend it. If you've read it, let me know if you enjoyed it below. Book number 18 is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Thought this was such a rollicking adventure story. I really didn't know what to expect when I read this book. What actually happens, this is a top tip for you, on Kindle, if anything is over 100 years old, the copyright has gone, and there are generally free versions of it around that you can download. So when I was a student, and still sometimes now, I download free books as long as they are classics that are over 100 years old. So this was one of them. So I really went into it like not knowing anything. I didn't know about Dumas. I didn't know about the Three Musketeers or anything before I read this book. And I thought it was fantastic. It bounces around to all these different places. There's ideas of treasure and imprisonment and revenge, and it's just this huge, big, really fun adventure story. Yeah, just really enjoyable. Like, I don't know why there isn't a modern day film of it, because I think they do such a good job. It felt really cinematic when I was reading it. Okay, number 19, I have gone for a Ernest Hemingway novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. This was the first Hemingway book that I read, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I didn't really know how it would be reading a Hemingway. I've since read The Old Man and the Sea, which I didn't totally love, but this book was really beautiful, and I think because it very much reflects Hemingway's own experiences. So the character in it has gone to fight fascism in Spain. Bit of history in the background. This was written in 1940. Earlier on, there was the rise of fascism in Spain under the dictator Franco, and he actually kind of partnered up with Hitler at some point, just to give you an idea of how awful he was. And it created a huge, big civil war that happened in Spain. And many people, George Orwell included, and Hemingway and various other famous people as well, felt so strongly in the fight against fascism, they actually went to go and join the fight in Spain, even though they were not Spanish and it wasn't their country. And this is the story of the war, of soldiers, of falling in love as a soldier, of the constant fear of dying. And it's just really, it is really beautifully written. Like, you know, obviously Hemingway's out there as one of the best writers, and I definitely can't disagree with that. Number 20 is called My Own Story. It is by the suffragette Emmeline Pankhurst. This was written in 1914. For those of you who might not know who Pankhurst was, she is the reason that we have the right to vote as women today in England. She, among others, and the suffragettes fought tirelessly, including torture when they were put in prison by the British government, something that to this day has not been apologised for. And this book, I really wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't think it would be very readable, but it really was. And it gave me a whole new level of respect for Emmeline Pankhurst. After reading this book, I will always exercise my right to vote because women died for my right to vote. And one of the main reasons that Emmeline Pankhurst talks about the importance of voting, particularly obviously this is 1914, is the amount of single mothers, children, working conditions that people were putting up with, the workhouses, which is like almost like a prison, but just because you're poor. That's where they sent people at that time in England. Was, oh, you can't pay your rent, you're not being useful to society here, we're going to shove you in a workhouse. And then they would force you to work like all day long, give you rations, really terrible living conditions. They would often split up whole families. During so they would have like a men's area, so fathers often couldn't be with their children or wives, and it was always like the worst fear. If you read a lot of Dickens, you'll know this as well, is like ending up in the workhouse. This is like kind of the remnants of that, of poverty, of squalor. And Emmeline Pankhurst is convinced that the answer to improving this is having women's right to vote and eventually having women in positions of power in politics. And I don't think there's anyone out there that can disagree with this, quite frankly. Women get done and they improve conditions, and they very often care about the people. Reading Invisible Women now by Caroline Criado Perez, so I'm going to do a whole booktube on that once I finished reading it. But yeah, it's literally like proven by statistics that giving power or financial power to women in the families actually leads to improved conditions for everybody in that family. Okay, number 21. This is one of the few books that I've actually got with me here. I've mentioned this book before. It is The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. Olaudah Equiano is a British man that everybody should know about, but many of us do not. And the people over at Empire Pod, one of my favourite history podcasts, are doing their best to shed a light on people like Equiano. So Equiano is thought to have been taken as a slave from Africa, taken to the Caribbean, forced to work there on plantations, then got taken and wrapped up in the 7 Years' War, constantly being told, oh yeah, we're going to give you your freedom, we're going to give you your freedom. Obviously treated very horribly in a lot of situations. However, some of his experiences were not as bad as others because he was learned and he could read and better himself, and he learned English. And he was lucky enough to fall in with a good family. And he wrote this book as one of the main sources for why the slave trade and slavery should be abolished. This book, obviously written a while ago in 1789, was still fairly readable. I would say it's probably one of the more challenging. But you can still generally understand the gist of what's happening. It's, for example, I'll read you a little bit. My master lodged at the house of a gentleman in Falmouth who had a fine little daughter about 6 or 7 years of age, and she grew prodigiously fond of me, insomuch that we used to eat together and had servants to wait on us. So you can definitely tell it was written in, 1700s, but it's just, they need to make a movie of this man's life. Like, it is this incredible adventure story, and he definitely played on that because that's what audiences would have come to at the time. But within it, there's this very powerful message of anti-slavery, of you are good Christian people, how can you be enslaving others? And that's the big premise to it. Equiano actually gets baptized in it. He feels he becomes a Christian during his lifetime, and feels very strongly that if you were a good Christian, you cannot possibly support slavery. It was really quite an extraordinary book, and one that if you are happy to kind of persevere with some of the harder language, I definitely recommend. Okay, book number 22 is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. Now, I've realised this isn't so much a classic, but I feel like we think of it as a classic, but it was written in 1980, so you can, 1982. So you can argue with me about it in the comments if you want. But this book was really eye-opening to me. I think I learned a lot about just the treatment of people in this book. Celie is this amazing character, so strong and ambitious, and escapes the abusive situation that she's been put in to look for a better life. I think this is the first book that I ever read that had a lesbian love story in it, so that's quite interesting. And very much about reclaiming your identity. There's a lot about race issues within the novel, and I think I was really bowled over by how powerful this story is. Okay, the next one is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This was written in 1890, however, still quite readable. I found this one, and it's all about Dorian Gray, who basically kind of makes this deal with a higher power, or the devil, that he will stay young and beautiful, and he has to have this like hidden portrait of himself that is actually showing his decay, and it's very linked to like his moral decay as well, of like becoming like a bad person during it. And it's a really interesting concept. I think when I read this book, I'd never read a book quite like this, and probably haven't since. So I think it's just a really great idea for a story. Again, found it fairly readable. And yeah, definitely talking about vanity and morals and society. Okay, this book, I had no idea what to expect, and I downloaded this on my Kindle, and only afterwards did I realise the actual book is about this big. This is The Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy, which was published in, I think, 1921, and it's all about the Forsytes are the family in it. So it's this huge, big, intergenerational saga. And I love that stuff when it's like all the different generations weaving together. It is told chronologically from what I remember from it, but I definitely think it's like one of the biggest books that I've ever read. It follows like an upper class family, the Forsytes, and then kind of like their fall from their class, from their wealth over time, with love and inheritance. And yeah, it's just like one of those really meaty books where you know whatever happened there is going to kind of weave into the next part. And I found it really enjoyable. I really didn't know what to expect before this, but yeah, be prepared to be reading this for quite a long time because it is a giant book. Number 25 is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, I have only realised more recently that Emma Stone was in a like modern day version, kind of updated version of this. But the original is just really, really quite harrowing. One of those stories again where women are shamed for being scandalous. The main character, Hester, she has a child outside of wedlock, and she won't tell anyone who the father is, and there's a whole thing there, and she's basically like shamed by the whole town. Like no one will help her. She's like all by herself bringing up this baby. And it's where they make her wear the letter A as part of her shame. And that's where that motif came from that we sometimes use nowadays as well. And so definitely very glad we've moved on in society nowadays. But it's a good reminder of how rubbish women had it in the past, and how they just had to deal with it and bear it and survive and bring up their children amongst this kind of awful society, and how they were being treated. Okay, number 26. This is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. It was written in 1870, but you genuinely would not know it was that old. Like, it really felt like a fairly modern book to me. I obviously loved it because it's all about the ocean, and I'm actually going to do a whole playlist of books that are about the ocean, both fiction and non-fiction, so subscribe if you're interested in that. That's going to be coming soon. So excited to do it. I've already chosen which earrings I'm going to wear that are ocean themed. So 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the main character gets on board this weird ship submarine thing, and they go on this big adventure around the globe, exploring above water, the reefs, below water, deep sea. It's just this really fun, like, rollicking adventure around. And the captain of the submarine is really, really weird. Like, the main character's trying to work out like what's going on there. So a little bit like mystery and intrigue. But I just loved all of the references about the ocean. They do a bit of scuba diving, I think, like old school ones with like some big helmet thing on. My favourite bit was where there's a black-tip reef shark that attacks somebody, which just is not going to happen in real life. Reef sharks are fairly small, and they live on the reefs. They're not a danger to anybody. Quite enjoyed that little bit of lack of information there about sharks, and I feel like there was a bit of shark shaming, like shark infested waters thing, which I think was obviously like a big thing that sailors used to fall into or talk about, which obviously I wasn't around in the 1800s. But I'm pretty sure there weren't loads and loads of people being attacked by sharks, and sharks generally don't attack people. Obviously, we have the rare incident of surfers in Australia. There are more people in the water now than there ever were before, and so that's why we hear of more incidences now, but it's very, very rare. To this date, to my knowledge, there have been no known attacks on scuba divers by sharks. It's because they think the surfer is like a turtle or a seal when they look up at them, and that's why they tend to go after surfers. I think like this book is probably one of the first sci-fi books that are out there with a lot of technologically advanced ideas. Like I said, like I didn't really know. I knew it was a classic, but I didn't know it was written in the 1800s. So I definitely recommend this book for like a big ocean adventure. And yeah, go read it. Let me know what you think. Okay, my next one is Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I think I've got this right because sometimes I mix up some of the Hardy books. One of the ones I did not enjoy was Jude the Obscure. Maybe I should reread it again now that I'm older, but I found that super depressing. So this one was a little more enlightening. It had quite a powerful female protagonist who gets to decide who she's going to marry and which man she should go for. And again, there's comment on different classes and who you fall in love with. This was written in 1874. Definitely would say there's a certain level of challenge to the language in this book. Like all Hardy's books, actually. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a good story of kind of like the feminist woman written by a man in the 1800s. So yeah, I recommend it. And I do get a bit confused with Tess of the D'Urbervilles is another one that I did enjoy as well, but I think I love this one more because of the kind of female empowerment side of it. We're getting there. Number 28 is A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. I actually thought of this one earlier when I was reading the book, when I was mentioning about To Kill a Mockingbird, because there's some similar injustice that happens in this story with someone falsely accused, and there's a racial element. So this is all set in India when it was colonized by the British Empire. It's a lot about the treatment of people, how they're treated so differently, what happened when the white women came over from England and how that changed and shifted. And there was a real snobbery and racism and classism towards the locals that came with the women. Yeah, it's a really good kind of analogy for what happened with the British in India too. This was written in 1924. Fairly accessible to read, I would say. I've read it a couple of times and I enjoyed it all those times. It's quite a thin book as well, so if you're looking for a classic that you just want to get through, then I recommend this one. All right, now my next two, I have to be honest, were not books that I absolutely loved, but they are books from different continents that I wanted to make sure I included. I've actually done a whole one about India, so I've included some classics on my Indian playlist, which I'll link at the end of this video, or you can watch it here. But this one is a Thai novelist that I read recently. The book is called Behind the Painting by Kulap Sai-Pradit and was written in 37. And it's all about a young Thai man who is a student in Japan, and he falls in love and obsesses over his benefactor's wife, and we're never really sure about her feelings back towards him. And then time jumps to later in the novel and they both return to Thailand, and it's really quite a sad story. Maybe that's why I didn't love it so much. I didn't feel as pulled by some of the characters as I was hoping to be. I don't know whether that's because it's a book written in translation, or perhaps was not the best translation. But I definitely felt a little bit colder towards the characters and maybe less bothered. But yes, I really wanted to include, I live in Thailand, so I really wanted to include a Thai writer in it. So check it out. Some of my friends, we read it at my book club, like they really liked it. I just felt like it was missing a little something, but it was still quite a sweet tale. I kind of hoped that it would have more stuff about Thailand, but like the first half is all set in Japan. So I was a bit disappointed with that too. My next and final one is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, who was a Nigerian writer. And this book was written in 1988. So again, slightly newer classic. And it's actually one of the books that we often read at school for exams in the British curriculum. I didn't do it at school, but in the summer holidays, I was at home in my parents' house, our family home in England, and I came across this book. I thought, fantastic, I'm going to read it. I know some of my students are studying it this year, although not with me. And I really, really wanted to love it. I didn't quite love it. I think there were some things that I guess culturally were just really bizarre to me. So it was interesting in that way. Like I learned a lot about some of the beliefs of the Nigerian tribes at that time. It's kind of set like pre-colonialism, going back in time, and this isn't a spoiler, but towards the end of the book, that's when kind of you start to see and feel a little bit more about the colonizers coming in and the white people, although it does reference that earlier on and about some of the changes in the ways of life. But there were some really, really shocking cultural beliefs that were there. One of them was that if a woman gives birth to twins, then they are evil, and they took the babies to go and die in the forest. And in this book, this is one of the reasons why, like, the white missionaries are allowed to come in, because there's obviously some people within the tribe that makes, particularly that action makes them feel deeply uncomfortable and distraught. And so then they start going over to Christianity because perhaps they feel deep down that that shouldn't be an acceptable thing to do. So that was quite interesting. I think for me, there wasn't like enough female voice in it. And that's maybe why I didn't love it as much as some of the other classics on this list. But I did learn a lot, and I do think it's an interesting read. There is a big twist at the end, which unfortunately I did see coming, because I have my sister's old copy of this book from when she was at school, and some of you might remember you annotate the books. And so she'd written the spoiler at the end about halfway through in the margins of the book in pencil. So I was pretty gutted about that. So maybe I might even have loved it more if the twist had been a proper twist for me. But anyway, hopefully it will be for you. That was my full romp through 30 must-read classics. I have loads more coming on my playlist soon. I've got the Greek tellings coming soon, 30 books set in the UK that I've been working on. I've got my Southeast Asia books and my Thailand books coming for you soon. Please subscribe and like this if you enjoyed my booktube today.